Does anyone else have anything? I have several. I have 25 RS 1000, which is language for reporting and basic standards. Without objection, I'll introduce both of those. And I have one other one, RS 0811, which is a return to work bill. Without objection, I'll introduce that. Okay, next item we have on is a briefing from HCBS waivers and wait lists. We'll start out with the Secretary of the Department of Aging and Disabilities, Secretary Laura Howard. Laura, welcome committee.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to give a few introductory comments. I'm going to let my commissioner do the heavy lift today, but I really wanted to take just a minute just to come up here and thank all of you. We're going to be talking about the investments in HCBS waivers and waiting lists. And due to some really good work by the legislature, we've been able to make some really good progress, particularly as it relates to the waiting list for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities and the physical disability wait list. You know, Kansas operates 7 home and community-based service waivers. And, you know, and although those aren't entitlement programs under Medicaid, this legislature has put a strong priority in funding those supports that really help individuals who are aged or persons with a myriad of disabilities to live in the community. So again, I would thank you for your investments you made last year that allowed us to remove, you funded 500 persons from each of those waivers. And I would say, you know, we've made a lot of progress. There's still some work to be done. So you'll also hear about, you know, one of our additional tools to make progress in the IDD system is standing up that community support waiver. So you hear a bit more about that. The governor has included some money in her budget. The Social Service Budget Committee at this point has also supported some funding to get that community support waiver started in the last quarter of fiscal year 26, and we're excited about that. I did want to mention, though, although we've made progress, a lot of progress in the IDD and PD world on our other waivers where we haven't had waiting lists, we are seeing some increased growth, particularly with regard to the waiver, the frail elderly waiver for our seniors, the technology-assisted waiver for children who rely on technology in order to, not live in a hospital, and our brain injury waiver, our rehab waiver. The governor funded some additional dollars to avert us having to have a waiting list in fiscal year 26. So we'll certainly be talking to you all about that. At this point, that funding's not been added on the House side. But again, I mainly just wanted to thank all of you for your work. There's an awful lot going on within the IDD world as well, connected to the community support waiver and other modernization initiatives. And Commissioner Hayden will talk a bit about those pieces as well today. We'll be happy to both answer any questions. So with that, Chair, with your permission, I'll turn this over to Commissioner Michelle Hayden, who's our Commissioner for Long-Term Services and Supports, and we'll both be here for questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Michelle Hayden, Commissioner of Long-Term Services and Support for the Kansas Department of Aging and Disabilities. Michelle, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Michelle Hayden. I am the LTSS Commissioner for Long-Term Services and Supports. And I'm going to talk to you just real briefly about what is a waiver. And you have it all in writing before you, so I'll just kind of highlight some of that. The home and community-based services waiver is an authorization for Medicaid that allows beneficiaries to receive treatment at home and community-based settings rather than be required to enter an institution. So historically, Medicaid only provided funding to institutions like nursing homes. People eligible for Medicaid who needed skilled nursing services, personal care, and related services were forced to enter institutions. So these are our 7 home and community-based waivers programs. We are also planning an 8th waiver for 2026, and that's the community supports waiver. Next slide. So this briefly just gives you an idea of how many Kansans we're serving. We're serving approximately 30,000 Kansans with HCBS services. So as Secretary Howard said, the governor has put in additional money for our frail and elderly waiver. We've seen a 7% increase in the number of people applying for this waiver. That should be no surprise as the baby boomers are retiring and coming out of the workforce. And here's just a growth chart for that. We also have seen a big increase in our technology-assisted waiver growth. This serves children 0 to 21 who are dependent on medical technology like vents, trachs, G-tubes. And we've seen quite an increase in those numbers over the years. So the governor is asking for additional funds to keep this program going so that we don't have to form a waiting list. We also have seen growth with our brain injury waiver. Some of you may remember 2018, 2019, we added additional people to the waiver to include people with acquired brain injuries, not just traumatic brain injuries. We've seen a 6% increase in the number of people on that waiver, and it continues to grow. Again, the governor's asking for additional funds to prevent us having to form a wait list for this waiver as well. So I just wanted to give you all an update on the 500 slots for the PD and IDD waivers. So this is what we have been working on. We sent out 779 total offers for the IDD waiver. 564 were accepted. And currently we have 446 new people active on the waiver. For PD, we sent out 1,150 offers, accepted 473, active on the waivers 321. So the difference between the offers sent out and accepted and who's currently on the waiver is probably getting their Medicaid applications into KDHE and getting all that taken care of. So they're still coming in, it just hasn't all been completed. So we spent a lot of time trying to reach out to people. We use the MCOs, we use Gainwell, we reached out specifically to people that we were having trouble getting a hold of. We used the CDDOs and targeted case managers to help us reach out to these folks. So typically on the PD wait list, we get a 65% rate of response to the offers, and on the IDD, it's about a 75% waitlist offer. So for the budget, for the PD waiting list cap, which came into effect last year, we feel like we are below that cap right now. We continue to bring those numbers down as far as people on the waiting list. And for each PD waitlist offer, it's about a $29,300 all funds to fund a slot for a person on the PD waiver. And as you can see by this graph, we continue to go down as far as people on the waiting list. So we're very pleased about that. So we've also been able to do an additional waitlist offer round for the PD waiver. So it was, as of the end of last year, we had 1,103 people on the list. We've sent out, just a few weeks ago, 322 more offers. And so the current wait list sits at 781. We do expect that we will be making more offers in the next few months, and we hope to eliminate this waiting list. So with the IDD cap, we have currently, we are under that cap as of now. We do project that we will be need to have 350 slots, additional slots for that. I understand yesterday in the House Social Services Budget Committee that they want to fund 500 new slots for the IDD waiver. And there again is the IDD waiting list. So we are going to be we are in the process of making 200 additional IDD waiver slots. It currently sits at 4,320. And then we've made 200 additional offers, and it will go down to 4,120. So the community supports waiver has been a big tool that we're using to address the IDD waiting list. The recommendations from the 2022 Special Committee on IDD Waiver Modernization, after 3 days of hearing and testimony, participants and their families and individuals on the waiting list and other states provided testimony. They want us to apply for CMS waiver. KDADS has brought on a contractor to help us with developing the community support waiver for IDD. KDADS has also hired internal community support waiver staff. The new waiver will help us to address our very extensive waiting list, and we hope to be serving about 500 in FY 24, or 26, sorry. So the governor also recommends including enhanced funding from all sources for to support the community support waiver. This waiver aims to reduce the IDD waiting list and offer essential services. And then by focusing on this, we hope to bring about a big drop in the IDD waiting list. So we've been working with our consultants, PCG. The governor has added into her budget more funds for us to continue that work. PCG has been an expert, and it has been essential for us to meet all the goals that we need to have in order to submit the waiver. So we plan to submit the waiver in fall of this year. We have to address the corrective action plan that we are under from CMS and include grants to assist providers in meeting those goals. So we do have a grant program through our ARPA funds in order to address conflict of interest and the unbundling of the day services. We have been working diligently on the waiver development with PCG. We meet a number of times every week to go over each appendices of the waiver and making sure that all the language is correct and will be accepted by CMS. Currently, we're working on a rate study for this waiver. So we've had meetings with providers to help get their costs in so that we can figure out how we fund each of these services. We are transitioning from the BASIS tool to the MFEI, or the MEFI, as you might have heard. This was a major recommendation that came out of the IDD Modernization Committee, and we will be launching that July 1 of this year. We've had lots of stakeholder engagement. We have had webinars, in-person meetings, phone calls with stakeholders in order to guide our work in the community support waiver. We have a technical advisory group that meets monthly, and we have a town hall every month to discuss all the things that we have in the community support waiver. So just talking to you a little bit about how important it is to have an integrated setting. This is part of the 2014 Settings Final Rule, which has been in effect now for 11 years, and it's to promote inclusion of people in the community. The rule is designed to shift Medicaid away from funding segregated institutional-like environments towards supporting services that enable individuals to live and participate fully in their communities. So there are key requirements for the cap that we are on. So we have to deal with a conflict of interest. We have a conflict of interest advisory group that we're working with, which is made up of providers and other stakeholders. We need to develop better person-centered planning. We have a contract with UMKC on charting the life course to help us have better person-centered planning, not only for the IDD waiver, but for across our waivers. And then we have community integration. So we are working with our providers to talk about what does it mean to be integrated into the community and to have services that are in the community. Some of our providers are doing quite well with this. Others need some more support in this area. So on December 16th, we did receive a letter from CMS that told us that they strongly encourage Kansas to take necessary steps to address the conflict of interest. So we are working on that. As I said earlier, we're providing grants to providers to separate case management from the actual provider of waiver services. We're also providing grants to expand our HCBS services to meet the final settings rule. So regarding TCM services, about 37% of the providers out there for TCM have at least one waiver service from the same agency. So basically 63% have conflict-free case management. But we are going to continue to work with the providers to see if we can get that other 37% in compliance with the final settings rule. So the first option is that they completely separate from the provider. We already have some of that out there. We have independent case management. We have independent CDDOs. We have providers that do not provide any case management. So, I mean, it does work in Kansas. We just have some providers that are very attached to also having TCM with their providers. So we're going to be focusing our attention on those providers to help them figure out a way to separate. If that isn't possible, there's an option 2 for like rural areas. We'd have to show that there are no other options within that those rural areas. We're really looking at that hard to see if we can look at some different models for that. We have recently contracted with a contract to help us work with our providers as far as what would be the most reasonable way to meet the final settings rule. So we've identified, we have an identification of a policy roadmap. Previous slides outlined a path to address conflict of interest and comply with federal guidelines. This includes separation between case management and service provision. We are committed to working with our stakeholders through a conflict of interest advisory group. And we will be having another meeting with them soon. We have these grant opportunities, which we are using our ARPA funds for to help these providers make that change so that they can provide services in the community. So we've had open lines of communication with CMS over the past years. So I do want to talk a little bit about unbundling of day services. So day services is a very generic term, and everything falls under it as far as the day programs. It could be a sheltered workshop. It could be just community activities work or day program. It could be a retirement program. It could be a program that's designed to help those that have many medical issues. So in the unbundling, what we're going to do is we're going to divide those out so that we know when people are looking for services, they know exactly what they're going to get. That, you know, there are many options that they can choose from as far as looking at day services. So the sheltered workshops, which people are really familiar with, we only have 14 of those in the state. They're just, they're not all of the day programs out there. They're just some of those. And we look to unbundle that by July 1st of 2026. And up here, we have some proposed services. We're not done tweaking these. We're still getting provider and family input about these potential day services. We've been looking at other states and what they've done and trying to develop the community support waiver and unbundling the day services on the comprehensive waiver. So through additional opportunities of funding such as Senate Bill 15 and the American Rescue Plan, we have these grant programs. So for Senate Bill 15, that is to, has a twofold target. One is to bring the wages up in the 14 sheltered workshops, and the second part of that is to transition to more integrated settings. So right now, we're working on getting all the wages up, and then we will proceed with working with them to get a program that will meet the settings final rule. So these are the grant opportunities up here. The New Day one, we have $8 million from our ARPA fund, and that's to support providers in shifting their waiver day support models towards more clearly and defined service categories. We have SB 15, which is focused on our sheltered workshops who have a 14C certificate, 5 million one time, 1 million, and then one time, and then for 10 years, there'll be 1 million each year as we shift away from the sheltered workshops. We have 5 million from our ARPA funds to deal with the conflict of interest between TCMs, CDDOs, and service providers. And then we have $5 million for HCBS capacity to expand the HCBS capacity across the state and support providers with settings rule compliance. The governor also proposed in her budget additional funds to deal with conflict of interest, and that would $10 million for that for targeted case management, as well as supporting HCBS provider expansion. She has included $10 million in her budget for that as well. So in talking about, with the MFEI, there was a resounding recommendation from the 2022 Special Committee for IDD modernization to move away from the BASIS tool, which is very negatively based. It doesn't look on people's strengths, and families very clearly said that they did not like the BASIS because it was so negative. Over the last decade, the MFEI was developed with extensive stakeholder input and field tested to make sure IDD waiver participants found eligible under the legacy basis assessment would still be eligible under the MFEI tool. The IDD waiver's reliance on the basis assessment tool creates inconsistencies and complications that would be amplified in the CSW and a different instrument. By implementing a single tool for the MFEI IDD, KDAS can assure a consistent level of care determinations across the IDD waiver and the community support waiver, preventing a nightmare scenario of mismatched eligibility criteria and streamlining PCSP and transitions. So just here is some of the information that you need to know about the MFEI. All reassessments after July 1, 2025 will be done through the MFEI. But current people on the waiver, funding will not change before July 1 of 2026. We're just going to be gathering our data so that we know so that we can implement the community support waiver and make sure that we have all the information we need with that. I know that a lot of people are really worried about all the changes. We feel like that we will weather the storm with this. Providers are very resilient in the community. They survived the on-vent managed care. They survived their pandemic. They've done a very good job of supporting people with IDD. We are going to continue to work with them to help them, adapt to the changes that are coming. And then here's just some more information. I really encourage you to, if constituents are calling you, to go ahead and they can email us or they can go to our website. They're listed on the slides. And I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yes.
I think what we'll do, we have one more testimony from Mike Burgess, and we'll let him do his, and then we'll just take questions, because I'm sure this is going to run into into the schedule. So Mike, welcome to committee. Mike's with Disability Rights Center.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I am so happy I didn't have to share everything that the commissioner and secretary did, but they did a wonderful job. There is a lot of good stuff out there, and so I will try and be very brief because I want you to have the maximum amount of time to answer or ask questions on that. But I get to get here to talk about specifically on the waiting lists, which is a tough topic, but I'm here today to share some good news. Which is really exciting because it has been such a terrible topic for so long. So last April, the waiting list hit 5,407 individuals and was nearly 11 years and growing. And that's terrible. And so I am so thankful for the leadership you all showed to add the 500 slots. The good news, and she was going through the slides really quick, but the current number as of the January report from the end of the year was 4,320. So that is 1,100 off. And there's a myriad of reasons for that I'm sure they would be happy to elaborate on, some churn as well as the offers. And the acceptance rate, I think, has been a little lower than they were anticipating, so that we've been able to make additional offers, which has been a good thing. But needless to say, that is still, it's still probably around 8 years. I'm not sure with the 200 offers where that will be, but we're still dealing with a really long wait. What we've seen, or what we suspected and now can quantify, and I'm happy to share with you, is that anyone and everyone was encouraging everyone to sign up early. If your son and daughter might need services a decade from now, you need to sign up for the waiting list today. But we had no way to quantify that. And thankfully, with the waiting list study that KDAD's commissioned, and they ended up hiring the good folks at the KU Center on Disabilities, we're able to kind of get some more data on the individuals on the waiting list. And part of it is we think that between 60 and 70% of people currently on the waiting list, due to their ages, likely are signing up early. And so our problem, while still huge, is a lot more manageable. It's not 5,407 like it was before. We're really dealing, if we're looking at over the next 3 years, probably adding a capacity of around 2,500. And the really good news is there's already a number of things in the works to help address that. And so I want to provide encouragement and kind of quantify that so you can see how this fits into the plan to get us to eliminating the waiting list for people who will need services now over the next 3 to 4 years. And I'm excited to be here and tell you about this because it's been so terrible for so long. In the steps, it's a 3-step thing, and I included, attached to my handout, a fact sheet that we developed with the Kansas Council on Developmental Disabilities that kind of walks you through the numbers and walks you through the steps. But basically, step 1 is adding some slots and some capacity to the comprehensive IDD waiver, which, again, just to continue the work you did last year, we need to do that probably another 2 times. To add about 1,000 slots there. Step 2 is the community sports waiver, which the commissioner just talked about. The plan is to ramp that up over the next few years to around 1,500. And guess what? That gets us to that magic number of 2,500. Now, the big piece we still have to address is how we manage the waiting list, because we have to go through and have a way to determine who needs services now and who needs services in the future. And thankfully, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's other states that do this. Kansas has historically been a first on, first off with a crisis exception process. So the person who signs up first, in theory, should be the first person off the waiting list. And that has served us well for a lot of years when the waiting list was a lot smaller. Unfortunately, human behavior has changed, right? There are so many people who are signing up early, it's making the problem seem much bigger than in reality we think it really is. A key piece of that is having a process where we determine when people will need services. And so states like Virginia, I'll just use it as an example. I'm not saying we have to do it that way, but they have a category for people who need services now or in the next 12 months. So you think of one budget cycle. So you know what that number is as appropriators, and you can, that's your target. We have a second category of folks who will need services from year 1 to 5 years from now. And so we've got a planning tool, and then we've got kind of a third category, which is 5 years or longer. And that way, if we think of the list in that way, we can use it as a planning tool and not what feels like a punishment, right? That can be a good thing for appropriators, for providers, for program managers to plan the services that we will need. And so that's the exciting thing. And the other piece, and I had a conversation yesterday with the family, and they're like, they've been waiting 10 years. And I'm like, okay, well, something's up with that, because offers should have gone out for anyone who's waited that long. And I don't know the whole story there, but just using this to illustrate the issue of the transparency. We have an opportunity to really increase the transparency for the family members. Wouldn't it be great if we had a portal where people could log in and see where they're at on the waiting list? They could verify their contact information. They could share their communications preferences, whether text or email or other means work best, rather than kind of a snail mail approach that we have that we've historically utilized. And so if we combine that with the willingness of organizations such as the Community Developmental Disability Organization, CDDOs, and Centers for Independent Living, who historically were much more engaged in the waiting list process, if we move them, give them, and part of it will be giving them some money, to hiring them to help manage the waiting lists and do some of that work for the agency. We can really have a tool that's useful for you all, for the agency, and for the families. And so that's the big goal, is to kind of rethink the way we do the waiting list and the way we manage it, to take into account when people need services, and then have a much more transparent process, which I think that's going to serve everyone so much better than kind of where we ended up today, which is, I think everyone has had some frustration and challenges with. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, those are the 3 simple steps that can lead us to eliminating the waiting list over the next 3 or 4 years. So that's my good news for the day. I know you may not have much other good news.
Thank you, Michael, or Mike. I guess committee, start out with questions. Senator Petty.
So I think Mike may have addressed some of them, but this is a question for Michelle. Michelle, you went over the different waivers.
Yes.
And you also went over, you mentioned along the way, the governor's recommendations. And so I was just wondering if you might be able to update us as to, has any action been taken on the House side when it comes to any of those funding recommendations?
I'm going to defer just to make sure that I have it correct.
The subcommittee.
I think they've reported.
Thank you for the question, Senator Petty. Yes, the governor's budget included a number of funding proposals related to waivers. The first was funding of $2.5 million all funds, about $1 million SGF, to start the community support waiver for the last quarter. The House Social Service Budget Committee supported that recommendation. Now, it's not been through the full House committee yet, but they supported that. The governor also recommended funding for the 3 other waivers we referenced: the frail elderly waiver, about $16 million all funds, $6 million SGF; the technology assisted waiver, $4.4 million all funds, $1.7 million SGF; and the brain injury waiver, about $1.8 million, about $700,000 SGF, to address the growth in the next fiscal year, to not have to start a waiting list. Those don't have waiting lists. That's not currently in the House recommendation. And then the other pieces related to waivers in the governor's budget. The governor also supported $1.5 million in state funds to support our work with the contractor, PCG, who's helping us with all of the modernization efforts. That's not currently in the House recommendation. And then the other piece, the governor recommended $20 million in additional funding to help support provider compliance around the issues of conflict of interest and provider expansion, $10 million in each of those categories. That's not currently in the House recommendation. As Michelle said, we have some funding from the ARPA dollars, but the governor added $20 million additional to help us support the providers through some of the transitions that are going on in the system. So again, what the House funded was the community support waiver, the commencement of the community support waiver. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Laura, I think you just answered this question, but I want to make sure I heard it correctly. In regard to the TCMs and the conflict of interest, it's my understanding it's a $10 million enhancement. Did you say that's not in the budget, the governor's recommendation?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. That's correct. The $10 million related to conflict of interest and $10 million related to provider expansion from the governor's recommendation are not currently in the House budget.
Another one, if I may.
Yes.
I think I just missed this information earlier in terms of the growth projected for the different waivers. I think one of them was in regard to aging population of baby boomers. But why the increase on the technology waiver and the brain injury waiver? Or do we have any ideas on that?
I think on the brain injury waiver, one of the pieces, as the commissioner talked about, was policy changes that the legislature made a few years ago, which changed the brain injury waiver from a traumatic brain injury waiver, think motorcycle accidents, hitting your head, to acquired brain injury, which could include strokes. It also expanded it to allow children. That's certainly part of the reason for the growth. And I don't know if, Michelle, if you have any information related to why we think the TA waiver might be increasing.
Right, so the TA waiver is technology assisted assistance for children. And we speculate, and we've talked to Children's Mercy Hospital, that because the increased ability to save these children who have these technology needs, we are seeing more and more of these kids come through, especially from like Children's Mercy, where a lot of these kids come from. And when so what they do is when they work with them there, and then when they are ready to go home, families depend on the TA waiver to help provide nursing care, vents, trachs, anything that child may need. And I first came to KDADS in 2017, and I was the TA program manager, and that it started out around 300 children, and now we're up above 800 in a very short amount of time. So we speculate that as our technology is better, medicine is better, that these children are surviving, which they didn't in the past.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got two questions. My first one is with the Secretary, Howard. I notice on page 31, it talks about lines of communications open with CMS. My question is, has there been any, with the new people in Washington, is there any possible changes in CMS that might affect funding, coverage, delivery? Just wondering if you might comment what you're hearing out there.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'll maybe answer that in two ways. First, with regard to some of the things we're talking about here today, just more generally, when we talk about some of the modernization efforts, the communication we've had from them about conflict-free case management, those things, those provisions have really been required since the final settings rule went in place in 2014. So those sorts of provisions, they were in place throughout several administrations, including the first Trump administration. So from the standpoint of those policies, we don't see that. On the broader context, certainly I have a lot of concern with regard to what federal decisions might be made with regard to the overall Medicaid program. I think we'll probably see that first congressionally in some of the budget work that's going on. For example, if there were to be a cap put on overall Medicaid spending, what impact would that have on senior services or home service waivers? I think we'll know a lot more about what those proposals look like in the next couple of months, but there's certainly a lot of conversation about impacts on Medicaid more broadly. But again, in terms of these specific policy changes, I don't see anything that would necessarily lead to a reversal of those. I think my concerns are more broad in terms of any larger activities that might take place with regard to the Medicaid program as a whole.
Thank you. My next question goes to Mr. Burgess. And my question to you, Mike, is on the American Disabilities Act. When I see Disability Rights Center of Kansas, when we have slots that need to be filled, the needs out there. Do we have any legal requirements that go into this kind of stuff that we have to do this? Or just wondered how that fits into, we're making progress, but is there something legally out there that might be an issue that we make sure that we address?
So, I mean, so ADA, obviously, it overlays all of this to some extent. I mean, the Olmsted case, which you might have heard about in, I think that was in 1999, like that, we're still figuring out the impact of that and how that shaped. I mean, and that, the good news is that's kind of what's guiding a lot of the things. I mean, we're seeing things align, like the final settings rule that the secretary talked about really aligns with the ADA and the goals. We had the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act is another piece of federal legislation that passed, I think it was around the same time, 2013, or no, I think it was 2012 maybe. It also aligns. So all of these things are kind of aligning. And so the direction that we're pursuing with the waiver programs really does align with all of these other federal programs that have passed, over the last 2 or 3 decades. So we're heading in the right direction, and I think, we want to make sure we keep the waiting lists as short as possible, and we want to make sure the programs are functioning and serving the people they were intended to serve too. I mean, I think that's always a very important goal as we're doing it. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And looking through the presentation from Commissioner Hayden, if my numbers are correct, the request for additional taxpayer money, frequently called enhancement requests, from the governor are right at $47 million. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but I'm going to pick one specifically, and I don't know if this would be for Secretary Howard or Commissioner Hayden, but on page 21, there is the governor recommends additional taxpayer money of $2 million from all funding, including $1.5 million from state general fund, to continue a partnership with a consulting group. I don't understand why a government entity would need a consulting group to help bring home and community-based providers into compliance. Is there not some federal government entity, agency that we could tap to help the home and community-based service providers come into compliance with federal standards rather than pay $2 million to a consulting group?
Senator, that money would be for public consulting group who have been working with to build the community support waiver and helping us with the compliance with the final settings rule. I am not aware of any other groups that can help us with this at this time, but it was recommended that we work with PCG to get to compliance with the settings rule as well as the community support waiver. We have a very small team with HCBS, so we do have to bring on consultants from time to time to help us get in line with the federal rules and help us with different projects.
I apologize, I still do not understand. If it's federal standards, there should be someone within the government, federal or state, that can help bring these providers into compliance rather than hiring an outside entity, spending taxpayer dollars to do that. So there may not be an answer, but that's something, Mr. Chairman, that I just have to question as to why we're spending $2 million of taxpayer money for a consultant with a government entity, because it doesn't look like it's a one-time expenditure. It's a continuation with KDADS in a partnership. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? I've got a couple, and first off, I'd like to thank Secretary Howard and her team for meeting earlier this morning with a group of us. Appreciate that. And one thing I want to emphasize too, there's a lot of changes going on at IDD, and some of these changes, the folks are really worried. I'm sure you've all received some emails or phone calls, but no one will lose their services. I want to emphasize that for the folks that are listening on WebEx. I guess a couple of things. Number one, I would encourage you to work with Mike Burgess with Disability Center. I think the information he shared with us, hopefully he's shared with you. If not, I hope you all share this because I think it's important that we work to the goal of getting to zero. We owe that to our IDD community. One thing you mentioned that you're under some kind of corrective action plan. Can you explain to us what happened and what's going on there?
Sure. So we're on a corrective action plan for the settings final rule. In 2023, we submitted our plan to come into compliance with the feds on for the final settings rule. And in 2023, folks from CMS came out and they visited different providers across the state, 6 in all, and they found that many of these providers were out of compliance with final settings rule. And some of those were, some of those actions that they brought to our attention were that TCMs were often connected to community service providers and people receiving the same services from both on the provider side and the TCM side, that some of these settings were not integrated. They were isolating within for the programs. And that those were some of the things that they said that needed to change. So we had to submit a corrective action plan to CMS to tell them that we are going to fix these things. And that's what we're using some of these grant dollars for, is to help providers come into compliance with the final settings rule.
Thank you. One final question I have is income limits for people that have children with the IDD. A couple of years ago, I was on a special committee and this lady came in and she said her and her children were forced to live in her parents' basement because she could only make $27,000 a year. And of that $27,000, $20,000 went to medical expenses for this child. Is that a state or federal limit? Is that something that we can change here in the state, or is this federal?
This would be a question for KDHE. I'm not on that side of it. However, once a child is on the waiver, the only look, or a person is, they only look at the income of that person. So generally, these people can go ahead and receive services. They don't look at the family income. So the family income is a different piece when you're filling out a Medicaid app. Only certain people are allowed to get Medicaid.
The child was on Medicaid, and if she made any more money, she would be removed. This child would be removed from Medicaid. That was the whole issue. And that's why I'm wondering, is that a state cap or is this a federal cap?
Kind of both. It's both.
We can follow up, Senator Chairman. We can bring the committee back some information on those eligibility pieces.
That'd be great.
We'll do that, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a question. Well, I do have a question for Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, did you write this one-page flyer?
I helped with it. I can't take full credit for it by any means, but yes.
Well, on your step 1, I just want to note that very rarely, if ever, have I seen a decision made by the legislature described as genius. And so I just want to make everyone aware of that. And thank you for giving credit where credit is due. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I could make one brief comment, we've had people from other states reach out to us because they've heard about this. And so that idea of the cap, basically the legislature making a bold statement to say, this is the level, we're not going to go backwards, is, I mean, that's really powerful. And so it took me a minute to kind of really understand how powerful and important that was. So yeah, it is, thank you, it is a genius thing, so.
Senator Clues.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The whole IDD waitlist concept is kind of new to my wheelhouse until about a year and a half ago. I did previously work a little bit with Senator Baumgardner concerning this and individuals just trying to get educated. And so that's what I've been spending my time doing. And so I do want to say thank you to Laura and Michelle. The work, the people, the difference for me came when up here you get a lot of generated emails, a lot of things, but I realize that this isn't about a list. It's about individuals, people's stories, and a lot of those stories came to my office, and I heard them. That really is what sparked my interest to get educated, and so I want to say thank you. I would not want to be in your positions, especially when you got families crying out and you got to make these changes, and so that's just wanted to note that. And I appreciate, Chairman, the fact that our goal needs to get this down. And obviously, we're a money committee, and we want to be stewards over the tax dollars that come through. But I appreciate your vision to see that list go down, because these are individuals' stories that affect the lives of people around us. So I think it's a good reminder to all of us on this committee. But again, thank you.
Any, Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make it short. And Mike, thanks for this information. I did want to ask the Secretary, so it does seem to make sense, because we hear so much about the waiting list and the fact that, as Justice it's been mentioned multiple times, if you're thinking that you're going to have to wait for a while and it's been first come, first served, and so you're going to get on a list when you're 8 and you're not really going to be eligible till you're 21. Have you been looking at, or as you're looking at providing better information to those that are on the wait list, or as you mentioned, offers are going out, have you been looking at some sort of a system where there is, in a way, an age division about where you're at, so your priority, or as he mentioned, the three categories like that has been done in Virginia?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Actually, it's interesting. When I'm old like I am, I can remember when we had that information at the state level. It used to be here. It used to be in our information management systems, where you would know how many people needed services within the next year, how many might not need services, for how many years. So now we're very interested in that. We were hoping to do some changes with one of our own information systems that's a bit antiquated. We're a little bit it's kind of gotten stuck in some reappropriations that are kind of getting swept up in the budget process. But I think we're very open to the conversation that Mike's brought forth, because I do think not just for our ability, but for families and others to very clearly know. And we spend a lot of money on a waiting list study, so we certainly want to make sure that things stay current and valid and has the right information, again, about who needs services now, who needs services in a year, and who might need services later. So we're very open to that conversation. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up, so a lot of times when we talk about services, it's the degree of services. It's not that they're not getting any services, but the degree of services. Would that be correct?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. For example, there may be some individuals on the waiting list who are Medicaid eligible related to family income. And so they may be getting some general Medicaid services, maybe getting some case management, that sort of thing. So yeah, and I think, and recall as well, when we put the community support waiver in place, that's intended to be kind of a streamlined, skinny waiver. It won't have the same comprehensive services as our comprehensive waiver, but again, that will then help us then to have the ability to see what do families really need, for a specific individual. So again, get into those levels.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, committee, I'll point out we do have a report from the NIAR and the aviation project at Wichita State University. Also, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and thank you for your work. But I think key to this whole thing is communicating with our IDD community and our nursing homes, let them know what's going on and work with them. So I think that concludes our work for today and we are adjourned. Thank you.